In the winter of 1888, in a railroad section house standing alone on the flats west of Grand Forks in Dakota Territory, 9 people lay down to sleep in a room that smelled of coal and wet wool and boiled coffee. There was a foreman named Elias Grote, his wife, their 2 children, and 5 men off the section crew who had come in ahead of the weather. The blizzard had shut the door on them at 4 in the afternoon. They did what any sensible family did in that country. They stuffed rags in the window sash. They laid a rolled quilt along the bottom of the door. They packed the little sheet iron stove full of Dakota lignite until it glowed the color of a ripe plum, and then, to hold that heat all night instead of letting it fly up the pipe, the foreman reached up and closed the damper down tight. That room was warm, friend, warmer than it had been all week. The children slept with their arms thrown out from under the quilts, and when the crew from the next section walked in at 9 the following morning, having dug the drift off the north wall with coal shovels, 7 of those 9 were dead. The blizzard got the blame. It always did. The newspapers out of St. Paul ran the season's tally with the section house folded in among the herders and the school children, all of it under the word froze. But here's the thing that ought to stop you cold. The stove was still faintly warm. The water in the bucket had never skinned over. The dead were not curled up in blue the way frozen men are. Their cheeks were pink, pink as June roses. A man who came in that morning said later that they looked like people sleeping in July. Nobody was killed by that blizzard. What killed 7 people in that section house was a sentence. A short, sensible, deadly little sentence that every soul on the northern plains believed the way they believed in Sunday. Seal it tight and burn it low, and the cold cannot take you. Smoke finds its own way out. Hold that. I am not going to tell you yet what actually came out of that stove and walked across that floor. We will get there at the end, and when we do, you will understand why it is the one piece of this whole skill that got quietly stripped out of the telling. The skill has a name, and the name is the reason it got lost. Your great-great-grandfather did not heat a house. He kept heat. Those are 2 entirely different trades, neighbor, and only one of them requires a monthly bill. Heating a house means making heat continuously and spending it as fast as you make it, forever, which is what you do right now, whether you know it or not. Keeping heat means understanding that warmth is a thing you catch, store, aim, wrap, and spend on purpose, so that 1 armload of wood and 1 heated stone can carry a family of 6 through 14 hours of 30 below. They called it many things: banking the house, keeping the room, warming the bed. Put it all together, and what you have is a home heating system with no wires, no pipes, no thermostat, no compressor, and no shutoff valve that somebody in an office 500 miles away can turn. I am going to teach you the whole of it, every piece, every step your people did by habit before 1930 and forgot by 1960. Every piece except one, and I will be straight with you now so you are not sitting there waiting on a trick. There is a last piece. It is not a comfort piece. It is the one that decides whether the other 5 keep your family warm or kill them in their sleep with pink cheeks and no smell in the air. We will get there. Stay with me by choice, friend. This is worth the 20 minutes. Let me ask you something plain first. If the power went out in your county tomorrow, in the 2nd week of January, and stayed out for a month, could you keep 1 room of your house above 50 degrees Fahrenheit? Not the whole house, 1 room. Could you keep your children's feet warm at 3 in the morning? Could you do it for 30 nights running without burning your house down and without poisoning the air in it? Most grown men in this country could not. That is not an insult. It is an inventory. Most grown men in this country have never in their lives made warmth with their own 2 hands. They have adjusted a number on a wall. Their great-grandfathers could keep a family alive through a Dakota winter in a house with gaps in the floorboards wide enough to drop a dime through, and they could do it half asleep, in the dark, by feel. Somewhere between him and you, that ability got taken. Not stolen at gunpoint. Traded. Sold off cheap for convenience, and then made to look like ignorance so you would not want it back. Today, we take it back. My name is Caleb Wren. I am the 7th generation of my family to live on the same ridge in the southern Appalachians. My people have held that ground since the 1790s, since before there was a road up the gap, and the house I sit in has a chimney in it that was laid up by hands that share my blood. My father died when I was 6. My grandfather Amos raised me from there, and Amos Wren was of the opinion that a man who could not keep himself warm had no business having opinions about anything else. The last 2 winters of his life, when his hands shook too bad to write, he made me sit at that plank table with a leather journal and a pencil and copy down everything he knew. Fires, meat, water, weather, wood. He would say it and I would write it, and he would make me read it back. This channel is me keeping that promise. That is all it is. Here is what I want you to understand before we start, because it changes how the rest of this lands. The old heating knowledge did not die because it stopped working. Masonry does not stop working. Wool does not go obsolete. A heated stone at the foot of a bed performed exactly as well in 1955 as it did in 1755. That knowledge died because between the 1880s and the 1950s, 2 enormous American industries and 1 advertising campaign made an absolute fortune the day your family forgot they could do it themselves. Central heating was not sold to you as a machine. It was sold to you as an identity. And the price of the identity was the knowledge. By the end of this story, you will know the entire method, 6 pieces of it, and you will know exactly which piece got worked hardest to make you forget, and roughly who cashed the check. Before we get into the meat of it, pull the trigger on subscribe. Not for me, because the buried skills we drag back into daylight around here, you are going to want the next one. 6 pieces, friend. That is the whole system, and they stack in order like courses of brick. The small room, the stone, the reflector, the skin, the endless fire, and the air. Miss any one of the first 5, and you lose the heat. You shiver, you burn twice the fuel, you sleep bad, your pipes freeze. You get discouraged and go buy something with a cord on it. Miss the last one, and you lose the family. 9 people lay down in that section house, and 7 did not get up, and every single one of the first 5 pieces was done right in that room, done beautifully. That is the part that ought to raise the hair on your neck. Most folks who try this get the first pieces close to right because they are intuitive. You can feel a draft. You can feel a hot brick. But the last one is invisible and silent, and it has been quietly stripped out of the talk for a century because the modern equipment mostly handled it for you, and nobody had a reason to teach you what the equipment was doing. So the real question is not what we forgot, neighbor. The real question is who cashed the check when we forgot it. Picture a farmhouse kitchen in February 1894, anywhere from Vermont to Kansas. 9 rooms in that house, and 8 of them are closed. Doors shut, curtains drawn, and in the parlor, the water in the flower vase is frozen solid and will stay frozen till March. Nobody thinks that is a failure. That is the plan. The family lives in the kitchen. Grandmother has her chair by the range, the children do their letters at the table, the dog sleeps against the wood box, and at night, a quilt hung on a rope across the doorway makes that one room into a tent inside a house. That is the first piece, and it is free, and it is the one modern people resist hardest. Shrink the space. Heat is not a moral achievement, it is a volume problem. Warming 2,000 square feet takes roughly 10 times the fuel of warming 200, and if the trucks stop or the grid goes down, you do not have 10 times the fuel. So you pick your room. Here is how you pick it. You want the smallest room that will hold your people, and you want it on the south or southwest side of the house if you can get it, because that is where winter sun comes in. You want it with the fewest exterior walls. You want it with a working heat source in it or next to it. Interior rooms beat corner rooms every time because a corner room has 2 cold walls instead of 1. Ceilings matter more than folks think because heat stratifies, so a room with an 8-foot ceiling holds a body's warmth far better than a room with a cathedral ceiling that puts all your good warm air 15 feet above your head where it does nobody a bit of good. If you are stuck with a high ceiling, do what they did in the old hotels and hang a canopy, a bedsheet, a painter's drop cloth tacked flat across the room at 7 feet. You have just cut the volume you are heating by a third for the cost of a box of tacks. Then you close the rest of the house, not just the doors. Stuff a rolled towel or a rolled quilt along the bottom of each closed door because the gap under an interior door is a chimney that runs sideways. If you have a room with a good south window and no heat in it at all, open the curtain at 9 in the morning and shut it at 3 in the afternoon, and you have a free solar collector. And if you have children who think this is misery, understand that for 400 years of American life, it was not misery, it was cozy, and the word cozy comes from exactly this. One room, one door, one fire. Live small, stay warm, every time. That is not just old-timer folklore either. Go read the farmhouse bulletins the United States Department of Agriculture put out for rural families in the 1930s and 40s on the subject of heating farm dwellings. They tell you flat out to concentrate heat where the family lives, to close off unused rooms, to reduce the heated volume before you spend another dime on fuel. That is the federal government, in print, telling farmers exactly what your great-grandmother did by instinct with a quilt and a length of clothesline. The number one botch on this step is people who cannot bring themselves to give up the house. They keep the whole floor plan open because it feels like defeat, and they run their emergency heat in a big open living room with a stairwell in it, and all that warmth marches straight up the stairs and puts itself in the ceiling of the second story while the family sits shivering on the couch in coats, burning through fuel they were counting on to last 3 weeks. 9 days later, the wood is gone, and it is still January. Your homework this week cost you nothing. Walk your house tonight and pick your room. Say it out loud. That is the room. Then find the 2 blankets you would hang and know where they are. That is it. That is the entry ticket. Now, a closed room and a fire will keep you warm while the fire burns. But a fire that burns 8 hours a day cannot warm you for the other 16. And here is where your ancestors did something that seems almost like a magic trick until you understand it. And it is also the piece that got buried the deepest and replaced by the most expensive junk in the modern catalog. That is next. It is 9 at night in 1871, and your great-great-grandmother is at the cook stove with a rag in each hand. On the back of the range, where they have sat since supper, are 3 flat slabs of soapstone, gray going to charcoal, hot enough to spit if you flicked water at them. She lifts one, rolls it in a piece of old wool blanket, walks it into the freezing bedroom, and slides it under the covers at the foot of the bed. Then the second, then the third. By the time the children come in, the sheets down there are warm as a bath. That stone will still be giving off heat at 4 in the morning, long after the fire in the kitchen has gone to gray ash. That is thermal mass, friend, and it is the single most useful piece of physics your family ever owned. Air holds almost no heat at all. Stone and water and brick and cast iron hold enormous amounts of it, and they give it back slowly, for hours, all by themselves, with no fuel and no attention. So the rule is this: you never let a fire heat air alone. You always make a fire heat mass, and you let the mass heat you. Practically, here is how you do it. Soapstone is the king of it, and there is a reason the old New England general stores sold soapstone bed warmers and foot warmers by the crate. It is dense, it takes heat evenly, it does not spall, and it holds warmth about twice as long as a comparable piece of granite. A slab 1.5 inches thick and about 8 inches by 10 inches is a lifetime tool. You heat it on top of a wood stove or in an oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 to 40 minutes, no hotter, and you always wrap it in wool or heavy toweling before it touches bedding or skin, because bare hot stone against a sheet is a scorch, and against a foot is a burn. Common fire brick from a hardware store works nearly as well and costs a few dollars. Cast iron works. A cast iron Dutch oven left on the back of the stove and then set on a trivet on the floor of your small room will radiate for 2 hours. But the very best mass in your house tonight, and the cheapest, is water. Water holds more heat per pound than nearly anything you can lay hands on. Heat a gallon of water to boiling, and you have stored enough energy to keep a bed warm all night. So you fill hot water bottles, or you fill sturdy screw-top glass canning jars with hot but not boiling water, wrap them in a towel, and put them at the foot of the bed 20 minutes before anyone gets in. Old-timers filled stoneware jugs and clay pigs. A cast iron kettle full of water sitting on your stove all evening is not just humidity, it is a battery. And the grandest version of this whole idea is the masonry heater, the German Kachelofen, the Russian stove, the Scandinavian contraflow, which is nothing on earth but this same trick built at the scale of a room. You burn a hot, fast, clean fire for an hour and a half in a firebox surrounded by 2 or 3 tons of brick. The smoke path wanders through channels in that mass and dumps its heat into the brick instead of the sky. You shut it down, and that brick radiates gentle heat for the next 12 to 24 hours off one small burn. Whole families in Central Europe slept on shelves built into them. In Russia, they slept on top of them. Fire makes it. Stone keeps it. Wool holds it. Bed takes it. Morning gives it back. And that is not campfire talk. Masonry heaters are a recognized appliance class with published performance standards tested and written into modern building codes in this country, and the combustion efficiency measured on properly built ones runs high enough to embarrass most of what is for sale at the big box store. The reason your grandmother did it with soapstone and you do it with nothing is not that the physics changed. Now let me tell you where it went. Circle the 1880s, when cheap anthracite coal and the cast iron base burner stove flooded American homes, because that is when heat became something you buy by the ton instead of something you catch and hold. Then circle the 1920s, when the forced air furnace and the oil burner and the wall thermostat arrived together. Forced air is the exact opposite philosophy of everything I just told you. It heats air, the worst possible medium, blows that air through the house, and holds nothing at all, which is why a modern house goes cold in 90 minutes when the fan stops. It was not sold because it kept people warmer. It was sold because it was cheap to install in a new tract house, and because it needed a continuous purchased fuel and a continuous purchased electric current, and a masonry heater needs a cord of wood and nothing else forever. Then circle 1956 and the electric utility's great national campaign to get Americans to live better electrically, with its medallion homes and its full house wiring and its advertisements promising a life with no fuel to handle and no fire to tend. 2 generations of Americans were taught that tending anything was poverty. That is when the soapstone slab went to the barn. Not a conspiracy, neighbor. Just how markets work. Nobody outlawed your soapstone. They just made sure there was no dollar in you knowing and considerable dollars in you paying somebody else every single month for the rest of your life. And while we are here, let us talk about what they sell you now. There is a whole shelf of $900 smart infrared panel heaters with phone applications and voice control, and they will happily warm the air in one room for as long as the grid is up and not 1 minute longer. A soapstone bed warmer at a flea market runs you $15. 3 common fire bricks and a wool army blanket run you under $20, and they will warm your children's feet on the night the substation goes down, and they will do it in 2048, the same as they did it in 1848, and there is never a bill. And if that expensive panel is already on your wall, friend, that is not on you. They are very good at selling. Most people are. Now, my botch, since I have earned the right to tell it. I was maybe 9, and Amos had me set on heating stones for the beds, and I got lazy and went down to the creek and picked out 2 pretty rounded river rocks instead of walking to the shed for the soapstone. Put them on the stovetop. About 20 minutes in, one of them let go with a crack like a pistol shot and threw a chip of itself across the kitchen and into the flour bin. Pour a stone out of water holds moisture inside it, and moisture turns to steam, and steam has to go somewhere. He did not yell. He looked at the flour bin for a while, and he said, "Now you know. Never wet stone. Never porous stone. Dense, dry, and warmed gradually. That is the #1 botch on this piece. And the other one is people who let a stone or a jar touch bare skin all night and wake up with a burn they did not feel coming because they were asleep. Always wool between the stone and the person. Your homework this week. Buy 3 fire bricks or 1 soapstone slab if you can find one, and 1 wool blanket at a thrift store to cut up for wrapping. Under $25. Then heat one and put it in your own bed on a cold night, just to feel it, because feeling it is what makes you believe it. So now you have a small room and you have stored heat. But there is a way to take the fire you already have and double how much of it actually lands on your body, and it was worked out by an American scientist in the 1790s, and almost every fireplace built in this country in the last 80 years gets it wrong on purpose. That is next. 1812. A Virginia parlor, and a man sits reading by an open fire in a room where the window glass has frost on the inside. His face is hot. His back, 3 feet away from the same fire, is cold enough that he has a cloak over his shoulders. That is the eternal complaint about open fires, and a fellow named Benjamin Thompson, who the world came to call Count Rumford, sat down and figured out precisely why and precisely how to fix it, and published the whole thing in his essays in 1796. Here is the piece. Fire warms you 2 ways. It heats air, which floats away and does you very little good, and it throws radiant heat, which travels in straight lines like light and warms the first solid thing it strikes. Radiant heat is the good stuff. It warms your body directly without warming the whole cubic volume of the room. So the third piece of the system is this. You aim it. Rumford's fireplace does it with shape. The firebox is made shallow, front to back, sometimes only 12 to 16 inches deep, so the fire sits nearly in the room instead of hiding in a cave. The side walls, the covings, are splayed out at a wide angle, about 45 degrees, so they act as mirrors and bounce radiant heat forward into the room instead of letting it soak into masonry. The throat above the fire is narrowed down hard, to about 4 inches front to back, and a smooth smoke shelf is set behind it. And that narrow throat is what lets the smoke out at speed while refusing to let all your heated room air escape up the flue. Shallow, splayed, narrow throat. Those 3 moves turn a fireplace from a decorative hole that actually cools a house into a genuine heater. That is not my opinion. Rumford fireplaces are still built to those proportions today by masons who know the trade, and the reason yours is not built that way is that in the 20th century the fireplace became scenery, a feature for the real estate listing, and deep, boxy ones were faster and cheaper to lay up. You do not need a mason tonight, though. You can do the same job with reflection and shielding. Set a sheet of metal, an old cookie sheet, a piece of galvanized flashing, a tin roofing scrap, on the wall side of your heat source at a safe distance, and it will throw heat back at you instead of into the plaster. That is exactly what a cast iron fireback does in a hearth, and firebacks have been sold in England and America since the 1500s. Hang a heavy blanket or a quilt behind where you sit, so your back is against warm cloth and not cold wall. The old tin reflector oven, the kind you set beside a campfire to bake biscuits, is this same principle turned toward food. And the simplest version of all is the one every camp cook knows. You do not sit in a circle around a fire in the open. You put something solid behind the fire, and you sit on the other side of it, and you get twice the warmth from the same wood. Shallow box, narrow throat, angled cheeks, bright wall, warm man. The number 1 botch on this step is putting a reflector too close and too flammable. A blanket behind your back is fine at 4 or 5 feet from a stove. A blanket 18 inches from a wood stove is a house fire waiting on a change in the wind. Metal reflectors need an air gap behind them so the heat does not conduct straight into the wall framing. And I am not your fire marshal friend, but keep the clearances the stove manufacturer gives you because those numbers were not made up. They were measured. Better a slightly cooler back than a hospital bill and a burned house. Your homework this week. Move your chair. That is all. Find where you sit in your chosen room and put something solid and reflective behind your heat source and something soft and heavy behind your body, and sit there one evening and notice the difference. It is free and it is immediate. Pattern break, friend. Everything up to here has been the easy part. A room, a stone, a reflector. Comfortable stuff. Pleasant stuff, but from here forward we are into the part of this trade where the survival myths were born, where the difference between doing it right and doing it almost right was measured in whether a family came through March with anything left to burn, and then, at the very end, in whether they came through the night at all. What comes next is the piece that turns a house from a tent into a thermos, and the piece after that is the one that killed those 7 people in the section house. Late October, 1890, a Nebraska farmyard. Two boys and a father with pitchforks, walking a wall of straw around the foundation of the house, 2 feet thick and 3 feet high, packing it down with their boots and pinning it in place with boards and stones. Inside, the mother is at the windows with a pot of flour paste and old newspapers, pasting strips over every crack in the sash. When the first hard snow comes, nobody shovels it away from the north wall. They let it drift, and they let it stay, because a drift is insulation you did not have to pay for. That is the skin, and it is worth more than the fire. A tight, insulated house with a small fire beats a leaky house with a huge fire every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And here is how they did it. First, banking. Straw, hay, corn stalks, leaves, spruce boughs, even manure, piled and held against the foundation and the lower walls where cold ground and cold wind meet the floor joists. That single move can stop the floor from being a sheet of ice, and it can keep a crawl space from freezing pipes. Second, the windows, because glass is where your warmth leaves. A single pane of glass insulates about as well as a wet bed sheet, so they double it. The old storm window, hung on the outside in October and taken down in April, works because it traps a dead air space between two panes, and dead air is a fine insulator. If you have no storm windows, you can do the same job from the inside tonight with clear plastic sheeting taped to the trim, and the seal at the edges matters more than the thickness of the plastic. Then over that, at night, you hang a heavy quilt or a blanket on a rod close to the glass, and you have made an insulated shutter. Third, the cracks. Take a stick of incense or just a wet hand and walk your room on a windy night and find the moving air. Door bottoms, window sashes, outlet boxes on exterior walls, the gap where a pipe comes through, the attic hatch. Rag, rope caulk, weather stripping, or the old flour and newspaper paste. Fourth, the floor, because in a cold house the floor is the enemy. Rag rugs, layered. Cardboard under a rug is better than nothing. Straw under a rug is what they actually did in cabins. And fifth, the bed itself, which in 1890 was a straw or feather tick over rope or slats with a quilt beneath you as well as over you, because the cold comes up through the bottom of a bed just as fast as it comes down from the top. Bank the base, double the glass, stuff the cracks, cover the floor, layer the bed. The federal government spent decades hammering exactly this. Go find the farmers' bulletins the United States Department of Agriculture published from the 1920s through the 40s on insulating and weatherproofing the farm home. They give you the straw banking. They give you the storm sash. They give you the caulking of the sash and the stopping of the floor drafts. And they give you fuel savings figures that will make your eyes water. That is not folklore, neighbor. That is the federal government confirming with a slide rule what your great-grandmother did by instinct with a pot of paste and a stack of newspapers. Here is who cashed the check on this one, and it is the coldest part of the story. From the 1920s to the 1960s, American houses got dramatically bigger, with dramatically more glass, and dramatically less thought about which way they faced. Why would you care where the sun came from when a furnace could brute force it? Cheap fuel and financed furnaces made the design of a house lazy, and lazy houses need permanent purchased heat. Nobody talked much about insulation in the American housing industry in a serious way until fuel prices bit hard in the 1970s, and then, all of a sudden, it was a revelation. This brand new idea of a tight house, an idea that any Nebraska farm wife with a straw fork had understood in 1890. Not a conspiracy, friend, just how markets work. There was never a dollar in a company teaching you that a free bale of straw and a jar of paste could cut your fuel need by a third. There were considerable dollars in the alternative. The number one botch on this step, and it is a serious one, is people who go at sealing a house like a submarine. Modern folks tape and foam and caulk every last opening in a small room, then bring a combustion heater into it, and we will come back to that at the end because it is the whole story. There is such a thing as too tight when there is fire in the room. Remember that. It comes back. Your homework this week. 1 tube of caulk, 1 packet of foam weather stripping, and 1 evening with a candle held near your window frames. Under $15. Fix the 3 worst leaks in the 1 room you picked. Just 3. But a tight room and a warm stone will not carry you through February. For that, you need fuel to last. and a fire that never actually goes out. And there is an old way of putting a fire to bed at night and waking it up in the morning without a match that I would bet money your family knew, and you do not. That is next. 4 in the morning, any winter, any year before the war. A woman crosses a cold kitchen floor in bare feet with a candle, opens the stove door, and there in the gray ash is a red heart the size of her fist. She rakes the ash aside, lays 2 pieces of split kindling across the coals, cracks the draft, and by the time she has the coffee ground, there is a flame. She never struck a match. That fire had been alive, unattended, for 8 hours. That is banking, and it is the 5th piece. But before you can bank a fire, you have to have fuel worth banking. So let us be exact about wood, because this is where 9 out of 10 modern beginners fail before they start. Wood must be seasoned. Freshly cut wood can run half water by weight, and burning it is like trying to burn a sponge. All your heat goes into boiling that water instead of warming your room. You get a smoldering, smoky, low-temperature fire. And that low-temperature fire coats your chimney with creosote, and creosote is what burns houses down. You want wood at 20% moisture or less. That means split, stacked off the ground, top covered and sides open to the wind for 6 months on softwoods and a full year or better on oak and hickory. Split it small because bark is a raincoat and split faces dry. A cheap moisture meter costs about the same as a pizza and takes all the guessing out of it. Then burn it hot and clean, not choked down and smoldering, and learn the top-down fire, big splits on the bottom, smaller above, kindling and tinder at the very top, lit from above, which burns down through the load with a clean flame and very little smoke. And have your chimney swept and inspected once a year. I am not your chimney sweep, friend, but a chimney fire arrives at 1800 degrees, and it arrives without warning. Now the banking. You do it once the fire has burned down to a deep bed of live coals, not to flame, coals. You rake those coals into a mound, and you cover the mound with a blanket of its own ash, an inch or 2, leaving them not smothered but sleeping, so that the ash slows the air to them and they smolder at a low, steady, contained rate for 8 to 10 hours. In an open hearth, you push the coals to the back and bank them against the fire back. In the morning, you rake the ash off, feed fine kindling, and open the draft. That is the never-out hearth, and in some of these mountains, a family's fire went years without dying, and carrying live coals to a neighbor in a covered pan was a real errand that real children ran. And there is a cousin to this piece that will save you a third of your fuel, and that the federal government itself pushed on American families during the First World War. The fireless cooker, the hay box. You bring a pot of beans or stew to a hard boil for 10 or 15 minutes on the fire, then you take the whole pot, lid on, and bury it in a crate packed with hay or straw or wadded newspaper or old wool, close the lid, and walk away for 4 to 6 hours. It finishes cooking on its own stored heat. That is not a folk rumor. There is a federal farmer's bulletin from 1916 on homemade fireless cookers, telling American housewives exactly how to build one out of a box and hay. Retained heat, again. Same idea as the soapstone, same idea as the masonry heater. It is all one idea, neighbor, and the idea is that heat is capital, and you do not spend capital you can invest. Dry wood, hot fire, deep coals, ash blanket, morning draft, new flame. While we are on gadgets, let me kill a modern one, because it goes around every winter and it is dangerous nonsense. The candle heater. 4 tea lights in an upside-down clay flower pot, and people online will tell you it heats a room. It cannot. A candle puts out something on the order of 80 watts of heat, and 4 of them is about the same as a bright old light bulb, which will never warm a room in January, no matter what you put over it. And what the pot actually does is make the heat feel concentrated at one spot, while you now have 4 open flames under a heavy ceramic object in a room with your children in it. Meanwhile, a hay box costs you a cardboard crate and an armload of straw, and genuinely saves fuel. Old ways work because they obey physics. Internet tricks go viral because they look clever. The number one botch on the banking step is people who bank a fire that is not burned down to coals, so they bank flame and smoke and half-burned wood, and they choke it, and instead of a sleeping fire, they get a smoldering creosote factory venting into a cold flue. The second botch is banking on a bed of new ash so deep the coals have no air at all, and finding the stove stone dead at 5 in the morning with the room at 41 degrees. It is a feel. It takes a week of nights to learn. Your homework this week. Stack whatever wood you have off the ground with the top covered and the sides open, and buy one moisture meter. If you have no wood at all, buy one bundle and test it just to see how wet what they sell you actually is. Pattern break, friend. Stop here with me a minute. Everything I have given you so far, a family in 1888 would have done without thinking. The small room, the stone, the reflector, the banked house, the banked fire. Those 7 people in that section house outside Grand Forks did every one of the 5 perfectly. That room was small and closed. That stove was cast full of coal. The rags were in the sash, and the quilt was at the door, and the drift was piled to the eaves on the north side. By every measure of skill I have taught you tonight, Elias Grote did his job. He would have been judged a competent man by any old-timer in Dakota Territory. And he killed his own children. Not through cruelty, and not through ignorance of the first 5 pieces. Through the 6th. This is where men died for lack of knowing. And this is the piece that has been quietly missing from the telling for 100 years. Because for most of the 20th century, a furnace in a basement with a flue and a house full of leaks handled it silently on your behalf, and nobody ever had to explain it to you. So let us go back into that room, slow. It is about 11 at night. The lignite is burning down from plum red to a dull orange, and the little sheet iron stove is ticking as it cools. Elias reaches up in the dark and turns the damper closed to hold the heat, the way his father did, the way every man on that line did, because an open damper on a cold night sucks all your good warmth up the pipe, and you wake with frost on your beard. He is not being reckless, he is being frugal. But coal, banked and choked and starved of oxygen, does not stop burning. It burns badly. And a fire burning badly, without enough air to complete its work, does not make the harmless gas that a good hot fire makes. It makes carbon monoxide. Colorless, odorless, tasteless, utterly without warning of any kind. And with the damper shut, that gas had nowhere to go but out the seams of the stove and the joint of the pipe, into a room that 9 people had spent the afternoon sealing airtight with their own hands. Here is the cruelty of the thing. Carbon monoxide binds to the blood far more readily than oxygen does, hundreds of times more readily. So it does not simply crowd air out of a room, it takes the oxygen out of a person from the inside while they lie there breathing. And the first symptoms are a dull headache and a heaviness and a great, warm, comfortable sleepiness. Nobody wakes up. Nobody smells smoke. Nobody coughs. The children sleep with their arms thrown out from under the covers because they are warm and their blood is being poisoned. And carbon monoxide leaves the skin cherry pink, which is why every man who walked into that section house at 9 the next morning said the same thing, that they looked like people sleeping in July, and why the newspapers wrote down, froze. Because a man who has seen 100 frozen bodies knows they are not pink, and he had no word for what he was looking at. The blizzard did not do it. The cold did not do it. The stove did not do it. The sealed room and the closed damper did it, together, and it took perhaps 4 hours. 4 hours, 7 people. So here is the 6th piece, and it is the one you must never skip in your life. Any fire in a room with people in it is in competition with those people for the same air, and it will win. Fire eats air. Every combustion heat source you can name, wood, coal, kerosene, propane, natural gas, charcoal, must have 2 things. It must have a way for its exhaust to get out, and it must have a way for fresh air to get in. Both. A flue alone is not enough, because a flue cannot push exhaust out of a house that has no opening to let replacement air in, and in a very tight room, a strong exhaust can actually reverse a weak chimney and pull the flue gases backward into the room, which is called backdrafting, and it is exactly as bad as it sounds. So, plainly, never ever burn charcoal indoors. Not in a fireplace, not in a garage, not in a stove, not once, not briefly. Charcoal is the classic killer, and it kills whole families every single winter in this country. Never run a generator or any engine in a garage, basement, crawl space, or against an open window. Never use a cook stove or an oven, gas or otherwise, as a room heater. If you are using any unvented fuel-burning heater, and understand that some states and Canada have restricted or banned unvented gas heaters outright for exactly this reason, you follow the manufacturer's instructions to the letter. You use it only in the size of space it is rated for. You keep a window cracked an inch or two, and you never, ever run it while anyone sleeps. When you bank a wood stove, you leave enough draft for the coals to breathe, and you do not close a damper down tight on a fire that is still producing anything at all. You wait until a fire is dead cold before you close a fireplace damper. And dead cold means dead cold, not warm. And then the modern piece, the one thing your great-grandfather did not have and would have paid a month's wages for. You buy a listed carbon monoxide alarm. Battery-powered ones cost about $20. You put one in every sleeping area and one on every level of the house. You check the battery every fall, and you replace the whole unit at the interval printed on the back, generally 5 to 7 years, because the sensor wears out. I am not your fire marshal friend, and I will not tell you what to do in your own house, but I will tell you this. $20 is what stands between your family and the thing that killed those 7 people in Dakota Territory, and there is no shame at all in leaning on a machine for the one job that human senses simply cannot do. Better a cheap alarm on the wall than a headline. Wood makes heat, stone holds heat, cloth keeps heat, fire eats air. Give it air or it takes yours, every time. Now let me tell you my own, because I earned this one too. I was 11, and Amos had the flu, and I was proud to be minding the stove. And I banked it, and I shut that damper down flat because I wanted the kitchen warm for him in the morning. And I thought tight was the same thing as good. Somewhere around 2, he got me up. He had his hand on my shoulder, and his voice was rough, and he said, "Boy, do you smell that?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "That is right." Then he opened the kitchen window 6 inches into 15 degrees and cracked the damper and made us both sit there in the cold with the wind coming in for half an hour while my head ached, and I did not know why my head ached. He did not yell. He never yelled. He said, "Now you know." And then he said the thing I wrote in that leather journal that same week in a boy's handwriting. A fire is a guest that breathes. Feed it air or it takes yours. And if your people did it wrong, if your granddad shut the damper tight every night of his life and lived to be 90, hear me. Mine did some of that too, in a drafty log house with gaps in the chinking that let in more air than a screen door, and the drafts he cursed all his life are the reason he woke up every morning. He outlived 2 brothers and got called lucky. Dumb luck is not a heating system, neighbor. Knowing is. And nobody hid this from you either. Not on purpose. For 60 years, the furnace was in the basement behind a door, professionally vented, and the house it sat in leaked like a basket. And so the 6th piece took care of itself and stopped being something anybody bothered to teach a child. There just was not any money in reminding you. Now our houses are tight, and our furnaces are gone in an outage, and folks bring fire back into the living room without the one instruction that came with it for 10,000 years. That is the gap. That is what we just closed. So here is the whole of it, in order, the way Amos would have said it at the plank table. Shrink the space. Pick one room, small, low ceiling, few outside walls, sun on the south. Close the rest. Rolled quilt at every door. Hang a ceiling if the ceiling is high. Heat the family, not the floor plan. Store the heat in mass. Soapstone, fire brick, cast iron, and above all, water. Warm it gradually, never porous stone, never wet stone, always wool between the stone and the skin. Fire makes it, stone keeps it, the bed takes it, and the morning gives it back. Aim it. Shallow firebox, splayed cheeks, narrow throat, a fireback or a sheet of metal to bounce the radiant heat forward, a quilt behind your back, and clearances kept honest. Put a skin on the house. Bank the foundation with straw and let the snowdrift stay. Double the glass, storm sash or plastic, and hang an insulated curtain at night. Find the drafts with a candle and stop them. Rugs on the floor, layers under the bed as well as over it. Keep the fire long. Season your wood a year, 20% moisture or less, split small, stacked off the ground and covered on top. Burn it hot and top down. Sweep the chimney once a year. Bank coals under a blanket of ash and wake them with kindling and draft, not a match. Cook in a hay box and spend half the fuel. And give it air, always give it air. A vent out and a fresh air path in. No charcoal ever indoors. No generator ever inside. No oven as a heater. No damper shut tight on live coals. Nobody sleeps with an unvented flame. And a listed carbon monoxide alarm in every sleeping area, checked in the fall. That is the whole method. That is the skill your great-grandmother lived by, and that 7 people in a Dakota Territory section house died without. And now it is yours. This was never really about a stone or a stove, neighbor. It was about being a person who cannot be shut off. If the trucks stop, your family is warm. If the grid goes down for a week in January, your children's feet are warm at 3 in the morning. If the price of fuel doubles again, you cut your need by 1/3 with a bale of straw and a roll of tape instead of writing a bigger check. That is not survivalism. That is not doom talk. I am not telling you the world is ending, friend. I am telling you the world has weather, and it always has, and your people met it with knowledge instead of a service contract. That is ordinary competence that got quietly taken from you, and tonight you just took it back. Here is your one small Saturday. Do not build anything. Go buy a $20 carbon monoxide alarm and put a battery in it and hang it in the hall outside where you sleep. Then buy 3 fire bricks, about $2 a piece, and a wool blanket from the thrift store. Then pick your room and hang 1 quilt in one doorway and stuff 1 rolled towel under one door. Warm a brick in the oven at 300 degrees for 30 minutes. Wrap it and put it at the foot of your bed. Under $50 total and 1 evening, and you will have done more for your family's winter than a $1,000 appliance would. Now tell me something. What did your grandparents do? Because different regions did this different ways, and I know it. In Quebec, they slept in the box bed with the doors shut. In Pennsylvania Dutch country, they had the 5-plate jam stove heating the room behind the kitchen wall. Out in the Southwest, they built with adobe 2 feet thick and let the walls do the work all night. Down here, we had the rock in the ashes and the shuck mattress. What did your people use, and where were they? Put it in the comments, and be specific, because the story that gets the most comments is the story I go deep on next. Next time, the 2-cent trick that let pioneer families keep a winter's worth of drinking water sweet and unfrozen without a single pipe or pump, and the decade the municipal utilities made absolutely sure your grandmother forgot she could do it. Keep the old ways they kept.